Okay, guys, so as usual, we're going to, after days of the week, read our chapter for the day of our chapter book. Of course, we're reading Wayside School Gets a Little Stranger by Lewis Sacker. Today, we are going to read chapter 11, which is called Voices. Now, remember, yesterday in our chapter book, we were introduced to Mr. Gorf at the end of the chapter because the kids were on their own all day. They were trying to do their best work, and they were wondering where their substitute teacher was. Remember, where was he? That's right, they found him in a closet. So, they've kind of said some mean things about him and Mrs. Gorf, so we'll have to see what happens today. Chapter 11, Voices. And here's the picture again. "My name is Mr. Gorf," said the man who stepped out of the closet. And, surprising as it may seem, the children weren't afraid. It was his voice. His voice was full of comfort and wisdom, like an old leather chair in a dusty library. It didn't matter what he said. It felt good just to listen to him. He was a handsome man with neatly combed brown hair and clean fingernails. He carried a brown briefcase. Nobody even noticed that his nose had 3 nostrils. 3 nostrils? Look, our nose has 2 nostrils. That means he looked a little silly. "Since I'm going to be your teacher for the next few months, let me tell you a bit about myself. I was born in the Himalayan mountains in a town called Kathmandu." "Kathmandu?" said Terence. "Cool!" Everyone laughed. They weren't laughing at Terence. There was just something about the name of that city and the way Terence said it. Terence's voice was like a rusty drain pipe. "Have you ever been married?" asked Allison. Allison's voice was like a cat walking across a piano. "No, I'm a bachelor." A bachelor means that you've never been married. So now we know that Mr. Gorf is not related to the other mean Mrs. Gorf. Allison smiled, greatly relieved. "Well, that's enough about me," said Mr. Gorf. "How about some of you telling me about yourselves?" "My name is Mac," said Mac, without raising his hand. Mac's voice was like a freight train. "I built the biggest snowman you ever saw. Man, it was huge. I had to stand on a ladder to put the hat on his head. It was a stovetop hat like Abraham Lincoln wore. A stovepipe hat like Abraham Lincoln wore. But I didn't know why they call it that. We have a microwave oven. Have you ever put a bag of marshmallows in a microwave oven? Man, it's like..." Mr. Gorf's nose flared. His right nostril flared to the right, his left nostril flared to the left, and the hole in the middle seemed to get larger. Mac coughed. He tried to speak, but no words came out. "Thank you, Mac," said Mr. Gorf. "Anybody else?" So something weird just happened with Mr. Gorf. We'll have to see if it happens again. Dee Dee raised her hand. "Yes, young lady?" said Mr. Gorf. Dee Dee giggled. She liked the way he said young lady. "My name is Dee Dee," she said. Her voice was small but full of energy, like a super ball. "I like soccer and Ninja Turtles. My favorite..." Mr. Gorf's nose flared again. Dee Dee lost her voice too. Let's see if this happens again in the chapter. "Who's next?" asked Mr. Gorf. "Yes, the girl in the polka dot shirt." "My name's Mauricia," said Mauricia. "I have 2 brothers and 1 sister." Mauricia's voice was like a pineapple milkshake. Mr. Gorf sucked it up through his nose. "Hey, what's going..." said Todd. Todd was silent. So it seems like every time that Mr. Gorf flares his nose like this, that the kids lose their voice. "Look at his nose!" shouted Eric Bacon. "It has..." Eric Bacon had nothing else to say. "Nobody said any..." Jenny tried to warn. Her voice disappeared up Mr. Gorf's nose, and soon the class was all quiet. Mr. Gorf's middle nostril had snorted all of their voices up, except for Allison. She remained silent. She knew she'd only get one chance to speak, and she had to wait for just the right moment. "Wow, what good little boys and girls you are," said Mr. Gorf. "So nice and quiet." He laughed. "Of course, this isn't my real voice," he said. "I stole this voice from a gentleman I met in Scotland." He touched the tip of his nose. "This is my voice," he squawked. If a donkey could talk, and if the donkey had a sore throat, and if it spoke with a French accent, that is what Mr. Gorf's real voice sounded like. But what he said next was even more horrible than his voice. Mrs. Gorf was my mommy. The children sat frozen in their chairs, too scared to move. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. Mr. Gorf touched his nose. "Who is it?" he said in the pleasant voice he stole from the Scottish gentleman. "Miss Mush," said Miss Mush from the other side of the door. "I just came up to say hello and welcome you to Wayside School." "That's very nice of you, Miss Mush," said Mr. Gorf, "but we're very busy right now. Maybe we can get together for a tea and crumpets sometime." Miss Mush giggled. "That sounds lovely," she said. "By the way, Mr. Gorf, are you married?" "No, I'm single," said Mr. Gorf. "So am I," said Miss Mush. "Miss Mush!" shouted Allison. "Help! Mr. Gorf is taking—" Mr. Gorf's nose flared. "Did you say something, Allison?" asked Miss Mush. Mr. Gorf touched his nose. Then he spoke, this time using Allison's voice. "Mr. Gorf is taking us on a field trip next week, but he might need some help. Do you want us to come with you?" So Mr. Gorf is stealing the kids' voices, and he's saying all kinds of things with their voices. It's not good. "Maybe," said Miss Mush. "Thank you, Allison." "Oh, don't thank me," said Allison's voice from Mr. Gorf. "Thank Mr. Gorf. He's the best teacher in the whole wide world." "I'm glad," said Miss Mush. "He sounds very charming." "And so do you," said Mr. Gorf, now speaking like the gentleman from Scotland again. And he touched his nose. "See you later, Miss Mush," said the voice of Eric Ovens. "Take care," said Calvin's voice. "Have a nice day," said Kathy's voice, all from Mr. Gorf. So we'll have to see what happens tomorrow. Tomorrow we will read chapter 12, on Monday, which is called Nose. And look, this is the ugly picture of Mr. Gorf. So we found out that Mr. Gorf is actually the son of Mrs. Gorf, who was the mean one who wiggled her ears and turned all the children into apples. So we hope that all the kids can get their voices back, but we'll have to see. I hope you have some predictions for our next chapter. See you soon.